Having two safeties the caliber of Justin Simmons and Jessie Bates is going to do wonders for the Atlanta Falcons defense.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. and I've been covering the Falcons for basically 2 decades, formerly at falcons.com, RIP, still going strong in this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen or first watch each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we will be joined by Cody Alexander of matchquarters.com, who's going to share his insight and expertise on exactly how adding Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons is going to impact this new look Falcons defense under Raheem Morris and defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake. But before we get into that conversation, it is a day to celebrate, I guess you could say, because training camp is essentially over. The Falcons had a big scrimmage on Wednesday. Raheem talked it up earlier as sort of a pseudo replacement for not playing guys in the preseason. And it's like, nah, it's not the same Raheem, but hey, whatever helps you sleep at night, my guy. But that's kind of the final button on training camp. We'll have the preseason finale on Friday. We'll have final cuts on Tuesday. And then there's probably another couple of days of roster maneuvering, and then it's on to Pittsburgh. So we are just around the corner. We're very close, and this is the time of year where I start to actually get a little bit excited. You guys know I can't get too excited because it's the Atlanta Falcons after all, but just a little bit excited because football is almost back. So all that to say, without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Cody Alexander of matchquarters.com right now. Welcome back, everyone. We are back with an illustrious guest. He is Cody Alexander of matchquarters.com. We had Cody on the podcast back at the end of May to discuss Raheem Morris's scheme with the LA Rams and the ways it's going to translate here in Atlanta under new defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake. And of course, the Falcons made 2 big additions last week, adding Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons. And let's talk about it. Cody knows this scheme inside and out. And I want to talk about each one of these guys and what they may be adding to this Falcons defense. But I'll sort of give you the floor, Cody, first to talk about whichever one of these guys that you think will maybe have the most impact this year for the Falcons defense. Which of these two, who you think is the more impactful addition?
Well, I think having 2 safeties that are 2 of the best in what they do, I think is really going to correlate very nicely to the back end. This is a back end that likes to use a lot of disguise. They want to play from a too high shell. Simmons has obviously played in a Fangio. He played in the Fangio scheme. He played under Evero. Evero worked for Raheem Morris. So like the language barrier, this is going to be one of those things that I think he's going to come right in and be able to plug in. I do think Judon is going to be probably used a little bit more simply. So in terms of just complexity and understanding and being able to kind of plug and play, I think Simmons is the perfect plug and play safety alongside Bates.
Okay, so I'm curious, when we talk about him with Jessie Bates, do you think, I think you already answered the question, but do you think there's any sort of clashing with them having similar skill sets, or do you think those sort of similar skill sets more complement each other, and maybe there's some interchangeability, which is always that thing that a lot of teams are chasing with their safety position?
Well, this particular scheme really would love to have a left and a right safety. So to me, I think it really feeds into the perfect scenario for what they want. They really want to be able to have a situation where you don't know who the down safety is, you don't know who the cover safety is. So being able to really lean into those disguise coverages, being able to change it up and give those guys opportunities to do different things and kind of team up to where it's not always like, oh, well, every time he's aligned at this position, we know what this is going to come after. So I think to me, it feeds into what they want on the back end, which is really a lot of smoke and mirrors. We know it's going to be cover 3 heavy, but being able to do it from a 2-high shell gives them the ability to really play with, well, I call it spokes, meaning that they can move these safeties into a ton of different areas. You can drop to the weak side. You can drop to the strong side, outside, inside, all the different areas. You can do a bunch of different things. And I think having 2 guys with similar skill sets really leans into that left-right mentality that they want in the scheme.
Now, one of the things I commented on watching Jessie Bates with the Falcons last year, and it's been a kind of a running gag here on the podcast over the last 9 months, is that Jessie Bates loves to cheat when it comes to coverage and sort of jumping routes. And sometimes he'll leave his corners out to dry. Fortunately for the Falcons, it didn't necessarily get them in trouble really at all last year. And Jessie Bates more than made up for it with a lot of sort of game-changing interceptions that probably won them 2 or 3 games more than they potentially would have. And I, at least from my watching of Justin Simmons, and I haven't done a super deep dive on this film, he seems to be a little bit less willing to kind of freelance. Maybe this is the wrong word, but to kind of do what he's asked to do on a given play versus Jessie Bates, who may be a little bit big play hunting. Do you think that's a fair assessment of their sort of skill sets?
Yeah, and I think it showed too when he played for the Broncos. He was mostly the cover safety. Kareem Jackson, who he played with for a long time, and in fact, at one point before kind of Kareem Jackson hit, the 30 years old, he kind of was the down safety and the guy that was near the box. I think Bates likes to be around the box, gets his nose in there. He's really good in run support. So to me, what this is going to be is Bates can really kind of be the adjuster. If he sees something, he can go. With Simmons' background in the scheme, he understands where he then needs to be. If Bates sees something and gives him an indicator, like, hey, I'm going to go here, he can then overlap on top of that, or kind of knows the answer to the test. So this is not going to be one of those situations where, hey, we signed a really good free agent safety, but he doesn't know anything about the scheme. So to me, I think having a guy, now they will need to learn each other, and they will have to come up with some sort of ability to communicate on the fly like that. That will take time, but I think after about the first month of the season, those guys should be on the same page.
Now, I'm also curious that with the integration of 3 safety looks with these 2 guys, Justin Simmons, Jessie Bates, and then now Richie Grant. I know the Falcons, before they signed Justin Simmons, were planning on deploying a lot of 3 safety looks, with DeMarco Hellams being that 3rd safety before his injury. I'm curious, sort of, how does Richie Grant sort of fit into this conversation with some of those 3 safety looks that they might show?
Yeah, and this is a system that really has not had a big nickel per se, but I really feel like they can kind of move guys around. And this is a trend that we're seeing across the NFL. I really feel like teams have kind of leaned into the fact that we need to have 3 different safeties, be able to put them on the field at the exact same time, whether it's in a traditional setting like a big nickel, that's usually what it's called, instead of having a slot corner out there, or in a situation where you're kind of moving guys around. I think it just opens up a kind of a different way that you can do things. You can move guys around. If you need to have Bates in the slot, you can move them down there and keep kind of Grant on the back end. If you want Grant down in the slot, great. You have 2 safeties that can kind of move around. And I don't think you lose anything. I think as we see more 12 personnel just in general across the NFL, having 2 guys that can play near the box and having a guy that can play deep, which is pretty much what they have with the Falcons, that gives them a lot of flexibility.
Absolutely. So any other thoughts on Justin Simmons before we turn the conversation to Matthew Judon?
I think people are going to be looking at this and they're going to be like, well, there's a reason why people weren't picking him up. I think the problem with Simmons is that he is one of the better safeties in the NFL. He was last year, but going forward, you're probably not going to pay him the premium price that they want to pay him. And I don't think that he really was willing to stick around with the Broncos and just kind of give them a hometown discount. Now, I think it does show where we are in the safety market of him kind of sitting at home for a long time. But he also had the ability to say no. And I think he was looking for the right spot and the right money and everything to come in together at the same time. And I really feel like had he have gone to the Panthers, I wouldn't have been surprised. The Falcons, I'm not surprised, just because I think he didn't want to have to learn something new and then be put in a situation really where he might fail. I think he's going to succeed in this, and I wouldn't necessarily worry about his age. I think the Falcons also understand that they have Richie Grant when Helms does come back from an injury, that they have a viable, they have viable free safeties, but this gives them an opportunity to have somebody who is a Pro Bowler, who is kind of at the top of their game. Yes, he's descending, but it gives them somebody that's really a plug and play, and now they have one of the better safety duos in the NFL.
Okay. Well, we'll turn our attention now to Matthew Judon, and we'll pick Cody's brain on what he's bringing to the Falcons pass rush and maybe other ways that he will be tweaking and adjusting the scheme around them. We'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, we got one more preseason game, and it'll be your chance to get into the bins for the first time this summer. You can find tickets for this Falcons-Jaguars preseason game for under $20, and you can eat good at the bins for under $10, so you could have yourself a nice little night on Friday night. But guess what? You don't have to decide right now, because Game Time is going to help you be spontaneous, right? Maybe you're worried, hey, I'm not going to get off work and whatnot. It's too much of a hassle. Don't worry about that, right? Because prices on the Game Time app are going to go down the closer you get to kickoff. So be spontaneous with Game Time, who are taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So when we talk about Matthew Judon, it seems pretty straightforward to me that his job is to just get after the quarterback. That's something the Falcons desperately need. Is there a little bit more nuance to it, to what Matthew Judon is going to do here in Atlanta from your perspective?
He actually adds in coverage as well. I mean, he was kind of using a kind of a joker role with the Patriots as well. So I think he fits the mold of what they want. Now, it would be perfect that he kind of already understood the system, but this is a guy that can come in, give you a top 15, top 20 pass rush in the NFL, which is something that really, I mean, let's be honest, the Falcons have been looking for pass rushers for the better part of the last, 5, 6, 7, maybe even the last decade. So being able to have somebody that can step in right now, we know we're going to get pass rush out of them. There is some talent inside that there's some things that can happen, right? These are 5-man fronts as well that they're going to be really leaning in heavy to, which means we're going to get some one-on-one. So having a guy like Judon, knowing that we're going to have him isolated on a tackle, is going to be a plus. He's also not going to give up anything in the coverage aspect of things. He's a top, if you look at edges overall, he's a top 20, top 15 edge in terms of coverage as well. So when they do ask him to drop back, it's not like it's going to be an uncomfortable situation for him.
Yeah, I did a recent film breakdown for the Locked On Falcons Insiders. Folks, click the link in the description at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons to get access to that. But breaking down Matthew Judon, and I thought watching his 4 games last year with the Patriots, he did a great job sort of carrying tight ends down the seam in terms of his coverage. Now, if that tight end had to sort of make a break at some point, that's not something that you want Matthew Judon really doing. Wow. But in terms of, I think, with sort of disguising some of the looks that you're doing, some of these sims and creepers and whatnot, if you need him to kind of spot drop or whatever, he can certainly do that. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
No, I think that's perfect. He will mostly be capped, meaning that he will have a safety on top of him. Even in cover 3, they have a lot of different rules within the system that really gives them an opportunity, these edges, an opportunity to really be able to play more underneath and not necessarily on top of guys. So you're 100% correct that he can carry a vertical of a tight end, knowing that he's probably going to have a safety help either inside, outside, or on top. So just playing off of that leverage, I think that he'll be perfectly fine.
Now, when we talk about Judon as a pass rusher, how do you think his presence impacts the other guys? Obviously, the Falcons' strength before this point in terms of their pass rush was the 2 main interior guys with Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. They've added a lot of young pieces to that defense on the interior, but the edge was a question mark. Do you feel like Judon will provide a boost for all of these players? I know that was one thing that I noticed last year with Josh Uche, that his production in the 4 games that Judon was healthy for was significantly higher than it was for the remaining games of the season. What are some of the ways that you think Matthew Judon can help the other players that the Falcons have in their pass rush?
Well, you can't necessarily just slide to him. You can't, double him. I think it also is you're going to see more running backs staying in, which again, just changes the math for the secondary, right? So like I said, they're going to probably end up being more of a 5-man front team. They did run some nickel last year with the Rams, and they kind of messed around with some more nickel last year, but I think that was more personnel based. But you have the ability now to kind of get these one-on-ones, which is exactly what you want. So now we're going to stack your offensive line with our defensive line. We have guys that can give us some talent and get to the pass rusher. Now that we have an edge, a legitimate edge, it's not like we're going to get everybody packed inside. We'll let a tight end or a running back handle the edge because we can. Now everybody's going to be spaced out. Everybody's going to be a one-on-one. And what that does is it's going to now pull guys that way. So it's just going to open up more things for the inside, and especially within this front structure that Raheem Morris likes.
I think it's a great point. I never really thought about it, where if I'm an offense and I'm looking at the Falcons pass rush before Matthew Judon, I'm like, yeah, we can go empty because I'm not really scared of really anything that they're really throwing at us. And that's going to make it more challenging for guys in the back seven and in terms of coverage and whatnot. So I think that's a big part of what he can add there as a pass rusher. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Judon versus the run? From what I've seen, he was very good at that, maybe not elite or anything like that, but certainly a guy that, will not be anything close to a liability in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, you can't play for the Patriots and not play run defense. I think that was a very much a thing, a Bill Belichick thing. All those guys are really good at running to the football. They're going to be good at the point of attack. They're going to be able to tackle. Now, is he just is he a Max Crosby that it doesn't really matter? He's just going down there and just blowing things up? No, but he can hold up at the point of attack. He can run and hit. He's an above average run defender. He's going to give you kind of a top tier pass rusher, which is really what the Falcons want. I think that they can mitigate a lot of the run issues inside from these 5-man fronts, and then they really just want him running to the ball, running to the quarterback on these play actions. So I do think that he will be more than capable of holding up against the run. And that's part of what he was asked to do with the Patriots. And I don't think that's something that will just fall off of a cliff when he goes to Atlanta.
So I guess my last question is there anything else that you feel like is worth, pointing out with Matthew Judon and some of the things that we can expect to see from him this year?
I mean, it's just nice that the Falcons have a legitimate pass rusher. I think that it's somebody that can hang his hat on rushing the pass rusher. We know he's productive. We know that he's going to be one of the better defensive ends in the NFL the moment that he steps in. It was really interesting in Hard Knocks hearing about, if you've watched Hard Knocks at all, but hearing about the Bears and hey, he had an upper body injury. We don't think it's going to be effective. I think he'll be able to plug and play right away and give some juice back to the Falcons, something that they desperately needed. And I really think, and this is something you going back and you look at this defense, and especially when it was with the Rams, when they were able to have a linchpin really in that secondary, and then also on the defensive line, these fulcrums, right, that were able to really kind of base and kind of, anchor each other. I think the Falcons have 2 of them in the secondary at safety that can do anything. And now you add somebody who's really going to be one of those nice, just kind of, they have to worry about Judon every time that he's on the field. That gives that defense a little bit of juice. And I think that this is something to be excited about, especially for Falcons fans.
Absolutely. It's been a very long time coming. A double-digit sack guy in Atlanta. It's an incredible achievement. So we'll see what Matthew Judon can do, and if he sort of lives up to the high expectations, to be the so-called savior of the Falcons pass rush this upcoming season. But I also want to pick Cody's brain on some of the things that maybe he's observing in some of these preseason games, some interesting new wrinkles or anything that he can add to add some more context to what we may be seeing in these preseason games ahead of the regular season when the real stuff matters. And we'll talk about that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, I want to tell you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, which you've heard me talk about a million times on this podcast. But what you haven't heard me talk about is this new offer that FanDuel has now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. And all you need is a Google account in a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on to download America's #1 sportsbook. And while you're there, why not check out and see what the line is on the Falcons Steelers week 1 action? Currently, the Falcons are favored by 3 points. That line probably will move over the next 2 weeks. And if you don't want to wait that long, hey, you know, check out the action for the Falcons Jaguars game on Friday night, where the Jaguars are 7-point favorites in that. You know, you're feeling good about the Falcons backups being underdogs in the game. Go check it out at fanduel.com/locked on, America's #1 sportsbook. So, Cody, we know teams tend to be very vanilla in terms of what they do in the preseason. They're not usually doing a whole lot of complicated things unless you're Greg Williams and you're sending all the pressures in the world in the preseason. Doesn't matter. First string, fourth string, doesn't matter. But most teams aren't really doing a whole lot of things. But I'm just curious, to your more trained eye, that for the rest of us, it's just like, it all looks the same to us. But are there any sort of things that you've noticed watching some of the Falcons preseason games so far that, stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see what Jimmy Lake's iteration of this is going to be. I think Morris, now that he's got a second time around as a head coach, I don't necessarily know, like, he's not going to spend 100% of his time in the defensive meetings. I think you're going to see probably a little bit less variety that you saw with the. I think you're going to see more man and more cover 3. They're going to keep the disguise. But I think with the things that you see in the secondary in Atlanta, they have more man coverage corners. They have more man coverage guys that they can really lean into that. Where I think the Rams wanted to do that. I think press is something that you're going to continue to see. I don't think it will be at the volume of what Nielsen had. With AJ Terrell playing almost over 70% press, that's just at the NFL level, that's just a lot. That's something that you would see at the college level. I think you're going to see a little bit more of a passive, probably isn't the best word, but more of a passive approach, an off-man approach, an off-ball approach in the back end. More or less, hey, we want to cap verticals. We don't want to give explosive plays. I am interested, especially with the interior defensive line, some of the movement stuff that they've been doing, just kind of getting some pass rush from the inside, which is something that if you can get pass rush from the inside, knowing that you have a double-digit sack person on the outside, those are some really good things, and those are positive things to look at going into the season.
So I'm curious, you talk about AJ Terrell and sort of what he does. I know a big question mark for a lot of Falcons fans all off season long has been the other cornerback spot. Obviously, we haven't really seen much of any of Mike Hughes this preseason or Clark Phillips, the two guys that were sort of competing for that job. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on whoever winds up, holding that spot? What are your expectations for the guy opposite AJ Terrell? Are we going to see something that we saw a couple of years ago here in Atlanta where you had AJ Terrell playing at an elite level and basically teams just stopped throwing at him and just went after the other guy? Is that kind of the expectation for you, or are there other things in consideration?
Yeah, I even saw, moving, early in the preseason, they had Clark Phillips in at the slot, which I actually think that might be a little bit of a better spot for him. I think that there is a little bit of versatility in the secondary spot that they have. Kevin King has proved that he can play a little bit. Mike Hughes obviously is kind of a man coverage guy. Clark Phillips, like I said, he can probably move inside. D. Alford is a pretty decent nickel as well. There are pieces there. I think what this Rams defense does, and I say Rams, this Raheem Morris defense does, is it really puts it alleviates a lot of pressure for the corners, where you're not just playing man coverage all the time, where we're not just kind of relying on one guy to lock down one guy, that it's more or less, it's a layered coverage. They're going to be more zone centric. I think even more than they were last year. People forget, but not y'all, but like outside, but like the Saints want to run cover 1. right? So what does Nielsen want to do when he came to Atlanta? He wanted to run a lot of cover one, run a lot of matchy different things. So this is going to be a departure from that. So I don't think the stress on the other corners is going to be there of like, hey, look, we got a guy that's holding it down. You've got to hold it down as well. I do think that Morris wants to play a little bit more man, and they showed that last year with the Rams where they just were kind of like, screw it. We're not going back to 2022 where we just played country cover 3 and let everybody get yak yards on us. I mean, the 49ers killed them in just yards after the catch. So I do think that there's a nice balance. I think that they kind of understand that balance, and they have guys and they have the ability to now balance out man and zone and really protect those guys opposite Terrell.
Okay. Well, Cody, I consider you the expert in these regards. Is there anything else that you, want to let the Falcons fans know that they should be on the lookout this upcoming season from the Jimmy Lake and Raheem Morris Falcons defense?
I like this defense. I mean, I am a fan of it. And I've been a fan of it since Morris has really been the defense coordinator. I think Jimmy Lake and Morris, they're kind of on the same page with what they want to do. You're going to see, like what you saw with the Panthers, you're going to see a lot of similar things. So if you want an idea of what this is going to look like, and I think people don't really, because of the Panthers were such a dumpster fire last year on offense, like they just don't realize, but Evero has done a really good job on defense there. And so that defense does work, and it's been proven to work in situations that are really kind of failing situations. Even when he was with the Broncos, they had a top 10 defense, and that whole thing was falling apart with Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson. And I know I'm talking about Evero, but Evero comes from the Morris tree. This is the same stuff that's going to come down. It's the same philosophy that's going to come down. This is a defense that really wants to make the offense work. And I think that you're going to see that with the Falcons. And I think there's an opportunity for the Falcons to really kind of push themselves up kind of in the class and in the tier, different kind of a higher tier on defense, just because the talent is there. And if everybody can stay healthy, this is a defense that can, cause damage in a division that's really kind of up for grabs.
Okay, well, I guess my last question, since you kind of brought it up, are we talking about a potential top 10 defense this year for the Atlanta Falcons?
I wouldn't say top 10. I would say they can be in the top half. You just never know with kind of 30-year-old safeties how far they can go. I mean, there might be issues that we don't know with Simmons that weren't public, and there's a reason why. But I don't feel like he's going to just fall off a cliff. I do think that the defensive line has the potential to be very good. I think Judon gives them some juice. I think there's some young guys too in the back end, that are going to be able to contribute. So I think that this is a defense that can sit right in that 12 to 15 range, which if the offense can produce at all, you're looking at a playoff team in the NFC South. So I do feel like that is, if you can do above average at all, you're pulling the whole team up.
Absolutely. Well, Cody, let the people know. I appreciate your insight, but let the people know, where they can find some of your stuff and some of the things that you're working on, as we get geared up for this 2024 football season.
Yeah, the best thing to stop stop by and find out what I'm doing is going to matchquarters.com, signing up. I have links to everything that you would need from there. That's a nice hub to go. You can obviously follow me on Twitter at _coach_A. That's usually kind of where I do most of my work. But I am on Instagram with Match Quarters, and then you can even follow me on TikTok with Match Quarters. So that's what I'm looking. I have a ton of stuff. If you're interested in Raheem Morris, just use the search tool, type in his name or type in Rams, and you're going to find a bunch of stuff especially with the Fangio system. I've written over like 20 something articles on it. So come on over to Match Quarters and learn more about what your defense is going to look like.
Absolutely. That's why I call you the expert. Because
I appreciate
it. I search for one article and I'm just like, oh, this it's too much. It's too much information. I can't process all of this information. So, Cody, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your insights into it. Basically, I was kind of waiting. I'll just wait till what Cody says, and then I'll just borrow your takes and then pass them off as my own.
No problem.
Falcons defense. So I haven't really been commenting too much about what these two guys are going to do. So now I can run with it. So I really appreciate that. And I look forward to maybe some future conversations in season where once we actually start to see what they're actually doing on defense, you can come back on and sort of break it down for all of us.
Of course, you bet.
So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's episode. Thank you to Cody Alexander. We'll have more, right? In case you missed it, we started our 2-part finale of the Falcons Historian Player Shootout on Matt Ryan. The first part dropped on Wednesday afternoon. Part 2 will be the next thing you hear on your audio or video feeds on Thursday afternoon. So check that out. And then, of course, we'll have one more episode coming your way as a final preseason preview with Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And I have no idea what me and Jarvis are going to talk about because we already know no one of consequence is going to play in that preseason game on Friday night. So we'll get into something. Jarvis and I will get into something at some point. So make sure you check us out. Continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Fantasy Football, Locked On Sports Today as your seconds, thirds, and fourth listens. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.